But thank you everyone for coming, and welcome back for those of you who were here yesterday. It was really such a fun day yesterday, and it was so great to see everyone. So, as I mentioned to folks yesterday, feel free to wear a mask. We know that COVID is still with us, so we do have extras up at registration, so obviously feel free to do that. Knock on wood, the sun is coming out, so our plan is to have lunch outside today, so that will be great. But yeah, so, yesterday was a great program, and I think my favorite part of the day was dinner and the lingering that happened after dinner, because there was really a lot of great conversation, and it made me think about just how valuable it is to be able to spend time with people, business colleagues, friends, associates, because we just haven't had the time to be able to do that sort of thing in the last 2.5 years. So I just feel very grateful that you're all here, and thank you so much for being here. So before we get going, I just do have a few quick announcements. One is, yesterday when I was thanking all of our lovely, wonderful sponsors, of course, I ended up missing one, and it's an awesome one. Northern Woodlands is also a sponsor, and if you haven't been to their exhibit table, they've got a lot of awesome things there, so please check them out, and thank you to all of our sponsors and to our funders for making this event and all of this work possible. Another announcement is for those of you looking for the SAF credits, so we realized we needed to have you sign in for each of the breakout sessions. Like each session has its own sign-in sheet. So for yesterday's sessions, if you were there, those sheets are available over at the registration. And for today, there is a sign-up sheet for each of the breakout rooms. So when you go to your breakout room, just fill in that, and those certificates will be available at registration. So just check with Cindy and Karen at registration, and they can help you out with that. And of course, if you're a lead blogger, you can also sign up for credits for that as well. We do have a post-summit tour, so for those of you who want to, this optional tour is happening from 3 to 5 today with our friends from Kingdom Trails. So there's information at registration, but you do need to sign up so they know who's coming, and you'll need to sign a waiver. So just, again, check in at registration and let them know if you want to do that. There's a bike or hike option. You do need to bring your own bike. There are a couple of rental places in town. And if you're hiking, just make sure you're wearing appropriate shoes, which I'm sure everybody here knows what that looks like. And finally, so we have some awesome raffle prizes today, and so please stay for lunch. Visit the exhibit tables during the break, and if you haven't already, get the stamps that are at those tables. Ask them to stamp your bingo card, and if you get at least 10, put your name in the hat. And at lunch, we will be raffling off some awesome prizes. So those prizes are in the back of the exhibit area, so you check them out, and then hopefully you'll win one at lunch. So, awesome program yesterday. The focus of the theme of this whole summit is the future of our forests. And yesterday we really talked about sort of big picture, what the future holds for our forests and some of the issues that are facing our forests, and also what is the role of this industry in really seeing that future out. And today, we're sort of switching gears and looking at, so what's it gonna take to invest in our forests and our forest economy? And so I'm really excited for today's program and for all the breakouts that are gonna happen around this. And I can't think of a better person to kick us off than somebody who is really thinking about this from a regional perspective. Our great partner, the Northern Forest Center, thinks about things from that whole Northern Forest perspective. And so I'd like to invite Joe Short, the Vice President of the Northern Forest Center, to come and kick us off today.
Thanks, Christine, and good morning, everyone. I think, like Christine, I was very energized. I am very energized and inspired by this room of people and just the great energy I think that we're all enjoying in being back together again. So as Christine said, my role I think really is to tee up the real entertainment. These 2 days are organized around that theme of the future of forests, and I really can't sum it up any better than Commissioner Snyder did yesterday, so I'll repeat. Forests, forest industry, and the forest economy are essential. Here in Vermont, across the broader northern forest, and I would say nationally and globally, they're essential as well. They're also challenged, and there's reason for hope. And today's program, I think, is really about the hope. It's about new products, new markets, ways that folks are working to address the workforce challenge that we hear day in and day out, and bring new capital to bear to grow the sector. And from my vantage point at the Northern Forest Center, working across the 4 northern forest states, we definitely see the challenges, and we see those reasons for hope as well, and I want to share 3 of those. First, people are talking about forests and the role that they play in our world, particularly in light of climate change and public concern and public policy around it. We may not always like the way that forests are talked about in those contexts. But as Terry Baker told us yesterday, even those challenging conversations give us opportunities to show up and to show and tell how forests and the forest industry are part of the solution. We just need to show up, and Vermont's Future Forest Roadmap that we heard about yesterday seems like a really good opportunity to do that. Second, as the last couple of pandemic years have shown in spades, people want the products and services that forests produce, whether that's building material, home goods, recreation, or many other things. And as we adjust to new normals in supply chains and fossil fuel pricing, I think there's tremendous opportunity for wood and wood products to find new markets as a domestically produced, renewable alternative to things that we are currently importing from overseas and or making with fossil fuels. We're going to hear about a fantastic example of that in a couple of minutes. And I wanted to share a few others from projects that the center has been able to support with grant funds from the U.S. Economic Development Administration and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities over the last couple of years. Here in Vermont, the folks at the Burlington Electric District are looking at opportunities for heat from the McNeil Station to provide district heating to the University of Vermont Medical System campus. And stabilizing McNeil is an important market for low-grade wood. We're investing still in marketing to grow consumer familiarity with modern wood heating technology, which is again enjoying a phenomenal cost comparison advantage over fuel oil and propane as a way to heat homes and businesses. Over in Maine, the town of East Millinocket is retrofitting a former paper mill building to welcome manufacturers of wood biofuel and potentially biochar. Over in New York, at the State University of New York, a team of researchers is working to persuade the US military that they should deck their trailers, not with imported tropical hardwoods, but with hardwoods from the northeastern US. It just makes too much sense, doesn't it? Up in Ashland, Maine, they're developing markets for a form of mass timber called structural round timber. And actually just this month, sugar maple columns grown in northern Maine are being installed as beautiful atrium structural components in a new museum out in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And finally, at the University of Maine, through donated equipment, actually by GoLab, they're installing a pilot line to continue research and development around wood insulation products and other types of wood fiber boards. The final reason I want to give for hope is what this gathering represents. When it works together with one voice and offers its solutions, the forest sector has a powerful message. Let's think about a few things we heard yesterday. You steward one of the world's great forests. You do it in thoughtful, responsible, and diverse ways. You provide things, goods and services that people want and need in the near term while keeping forests as forests for the long term. You offer climate solutions that also provide jobs, that provide recreation and provide beauty. Who doesn't want those things? If we collectively step up in a unified way with those messages, and I will admit it sometimes feels like shouting into the wind, I think there's a lot of reason for hope. So with that, I'd like to hand off to a team of people who have worked persistently and tirelessly and courageously, I would say, over the last couple of years to make one example of this potential a reality. We're going to start with a short video, and then Janice St will take it from there. Thank you, and let's all enjoy the day.
You know, our family's always been in the sawmill business. We love the way of life, and it's hard work. You know, there's nothing wrong with hard work. If you lived on an island, probably you'd be fishing. Or if you lived in the desert, you'd be doing something with sand. But we live in a sea of trees, and it's only natural that we make a living from the woods and off the land. We make square boards, rectangular boards, out of round logs. So we make a lot of chips. And those all go to the paper companies. The paper industry has been suffering. When we lose our paper company, we lose the market for those chips. And that means that the whole wood industry in Maine is suffering because we need markets for low-grade wood.
Buildings account for about 40% of the total carbon emissions globally. Buildings have to save energy to address climate change. You know, one of the advantages of having a design-build company and not just being an architect is that you get feedback every day about the buildings you're building, the materials you're using, and how it's going. It really depends on the insulation product you use as to how effective you're going to be in actually saving carbon. We've always had complaints about insulation. It's itchy, it's scratchy. We make all these microplastic beads when we cut it. They have, you know, kind of scratchy respiratory issues after using it. They're using full respirators and tie-back suits in many cases to install it. We knew there was a problem. It takes about 8 years of energy savings, carbon savings in emissions to pay for the carbon debt of the original insulation you install when you're using conventional insulation. Quite frankly, we don't have 8 years to wait.
You just pick it up, you know what it is. You know that it's wood fiber. You know, I wanted to know more about the product and how it performed, and Matt said, you know, best in class acoustics, best in class vapor permeability.
So we knew about wood fiber insulation from Europe. We're talking about a material that's natural, it's 95% wood. There's no added toxins.
And I said, you know, when are we going to use it? And he said, never, because it's not manufactured here and shipping it is not, you know, a business model that works. And I just couldn't really accept that. I couldn't understand why this product was not manufactured in North America, where we have better wood resources than they do in Europe, and we have a building style that fits this type of insulation better than what they have there.
I lived in Maine all my life, and you drive around Maine, any town you go through, almost, there's some buildings sitting there that something used to be there. Most people don't realize what a tremendous economic engine a paper mill is. You know, they employ hundreds of people.
The people who worked at the UPM paper plant for so many years, their intellect, their capability, their passion for forest products for the community, losing that out of your community, a small community, is absolutely devastating. When we're up at full production, we're employing more than 100 people in that community. Well, those are 100 good paying jobs in a community that is a couple thousand people. That has a multiplier effect that is massive for the overall community, and it really is the identity of a lot of these communities in Maine. We need working forests in order to grow the forests, in order to keep them viable. When it comes to Madison, it's right in the heart of the wood basket for Maine. We have a huge market in the Northeast for insulation. It's the biggest insulation market in the entire United States. We have a lot of existing housing that needs to be upgraded.
The key to addressing the climate crisis with buildings is to not only save energy in the future, but also do it with insulation products that come to the job site with a negative carbon footprint or that are carbon storing. And wood fiber insulation is the only scalable option that can do that. You know, it's easy to handle, it's very familiar, it's not scratchy, they can cut it easily, the byproduct of the cutting is sawdust. With wood fiber, you never have that impermeable layer, and like Gore-Tex, it allows that moisture to move through the assembly, not causing any mildew or rot in that wall assembly. And so the game-changing aspect of wood fiber insulation is that not only does it have the favorable building performance attributes, but it's also cost competitive. And that's really key to the success of any insulation, is that it has to be cost competitive with the alternates in the market, but also bring the building science performances that we need.
It is a dynamic industry, and we have to keep changing to keep up with the times. Every time you add a little more value, you leave some of the competition behind. Well, I see the same thing with GoLab. They're gonna make at least 3 different products there, you know, that's adding value. Wherever there's timber, there's sawmills. Wherever there's sawmills, there are residuals that they need to get rid of. And everybody I know that burns their chips would rather sell their chips to somebody like a GoLab or a paper company. Once the reputation gets out there and what a great product this is, and people learn how to use it, I think it will go all over the country.
Can you all hear me? Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. I've watched it many times, and it always gets me every single time. And what an amazing opportunity this is for Maine and the Northern Forest. So good morning, my name is Janice St. Onge. I'm the president of the Flexible Capital Fund, and we provide what I would call risk capital, patient risk capital to companies in Vermont and the region's forestry, food system, and clean technology market sectors. We've been around for about 10 years. And GoLab was our first investment outside of Vermont. And we were really excited because of all of the reasons the video talked about in the work that they're doing and moving this forward. This is a startup company, so they're not yet producing, and so it was a big risk on our part. But one of the reasons we wanted to have them highlight this as a case study today for this group was because of the number of collaborators and the vision that the founders had and the opportunity this provides for the Northern Forest. We think that there's ways to look at this as an example of what you can do when you believe that anything is possible. So I'd like to introduce our panelists this morning, and actually I'm going to let them introduce themselves and give their relationship to GoLab, and then we're going to have one of the co-founders, Josh Henry, go ahead and tell the story, even more than what we've seen already. So, Josh, go ahead and introduce yourself. We'll use them microphones here.
I'm pretty loud. Can you guys hear me in the back? Yep. So I'm Josh Henry. I'm the co-founder and president of GoLab, or TimberHP.
I'm Tony Grassi. I'm chairman of the board of GoLab.
I'm Heather Johnson. I'm the commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development in Maine.
I'm Deb Favreau, the chief development officer at the Massachusetts Housing Investment Corporation. We're a nonprofit financial institution that works all over New England.
Great. So what we're going to do here is Josh is going to tell his story of how this came to be, and then the reason we have these. Anyone? Anyone?
Nope, that's okay. We're just going to turn this one off since you guys are loud.
It was too close.
Too close. That's right.
Perfect.
All right, give that a whirl. Sorry, folks.
So we have this panel of funders and investors here to talk about all the different kinds of money that went into this financing package and why it was so important to have collaboration. So Josh, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Janice. And thank you guys all I sat in on one of the sessions yesterday, and quite honored to be here. Use the mic. Okay. Sorry. I'm quite honored to be here. A big part of our, I'll just speak up. A big part of our success has to do with the loggers and sawmill operators in the state of Maine, and their patience with us in learning about the industry. My background has nothing to do with forest products. When this started, I'm a materials chemist. I was teaching quantum mechanics and thermodynamics and intro chemistry at the University of Maine when this started. Guess you could say I'm, what I would call an energy nerd, someone who's really interested in energy and equipment and big industrial equipment and things like that. And around 2015, I met my co-founder that you saw in that movie, Matt O'Malia. Matt's an architect and an entrepreneur. He started a business in Belfast, Maine, where I live on the coast. That business, GoLogic, built the first certified passive house in Maine. It was the 12th in the country. And for those of you who don't know, passive house is an approach to design and construction that results in buildings that consume 1/10 of the energy of those built to standard code. So if you can imagine it, if you're not familiar with it, imagine your, salt box house, or my cape, and imagine you don't have an oil tank in your basement or a boiler at all. Imagine you have electric baseboard heating and you're saving 90% on your energy bills, especially right now, because you're heating with effectively what is, the equivalent of a hairdryer, even during the depths of winter. I was fascinated by Matt's approach when I met him and he explained it to me. And what I really liked about it, though, was how Matt explained passive house. It wasn't about the greenest approach to building or even an environmental movement. It was just about common sense. Where we live, Vermont is the same as Maine. 75 cents of every gallon that we spend on heating fuel or gasoline goes to somewhere else in the world or in the country. There's really, as Joe pointed out, there's really no business for us to be spending all of this money. It's just a complete economic drain out of the Northeast for us to be, heating our houses with oil, not insulating them to sufficient values. What I liked about Matt's approach is that he said by doing that, by insulating buildings properly, by weather sealing them, what you could do is not just reduce operational energy consumption and cost, but by eliminating those expensive HVAC systems, you could come in first cost competitive with building a house with standard code construction. And I just thought, well, of course, everyone's going to do that. If you can build a house better for the same cost and save 90% on your energy costs, who is not going to do that? And I just thought, okay, well, that's the future of building. He's identified it, and the technology's here today to do it. So of course we're going to do that. That's the way it's going to be done. I was, as I said, an academic, probably one of the most useless people in the economy. So I basically just did not see how I was going to be able to help him do that. I thought, great thing you're doing. I don't think I can really help, but he was convinced, and that there were all these material challenges that were going to come up, and were already there, that they were importing most of the products that they use in their houses from Europe. And we started a collaboration. And I started to learn about how they did what they did. And one day I went to a job site, a nearby school that they were doing. And before the Robbins lumber siding is on the exterior of the building, I got there, and what you see is basically a giant cheap beer cooler that you get at at Cumbies. And you're just I was like, this is the environmental approach to building, just thick stacks of styrofoam on the exterior of building. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, the environmental movement was all about getting rid of styrofoam coffee cups. And here, this trend-setting environmentalist was telling me, this is how you build a building environmentally sound. And I just thought, you're just replacing one disaster with another. And I told him the cheap beer cooler thing, he didn't like that very much. And then one day we came into the conference room, and sitting on the table was a piece of wood fiber insulation. For those of you who don't know what wood fiber insulation is, come and see Edith and I at our booth, and you can pick up some samples. It's a suite of products, 3 products, board, bat, and loose fill, so you can blanket your whole house with it. That's made from softwood, and softwood residuals in particular. It's been around in Europe for over 20 years. It's a $1 billion industry in Europe, but it's never been manufactured in North America. And what's like truly shocking about that is in Europe, 75% of their housing stock is masonry, not wood frame construction. So most of that wood fiber insulation is being sold into the wood frame construction market in Europe, which is our entire market. And we just thought, okay, someone needs to do this. I was driving every day to work. I was teaching at UMaine and Maine Maritime Academy, and one day I'm driving past the Bucksport paper mill, and it's there, and the next day, literally within 2 weeks, it was gone. That was just a huge eye-opener to me, that like something of that the magnitude of the value of that infrastructure could just go away like that. And I started to get concerned, and we started to collaborate with the University of Maine, wrote some grants to the state and federal government that were funded, and started to work on really trying to convince you folks to do this for us, because an architect and a academic, it was like the worst possible combination to start a manufacturing company. But we were starting in 2015, and paper mills were closing all over the place, and we just really believed, and we got a lot of fortunate breaks. And I know I could go on all day. Everyone on this stand knows I could, but I won't. I'll just say that one of the lucky breaks is that Matt and I speak fluent German. We had worked in Germany, and we made friends with all the producers in Germany, and they had the same questions we did. Why isn't this produced in North America? It's a better product there. And we took the financial model that they were using that gave us the look under the hood of exactly how they were doing their manufacturing business. We took that, transposed it to North America, and what you find are 2 important things. One, wood costs here at that time were 1/3 of what we're paying for residuals here, and energy costs are half. Right now, actually, we pay 1/4 and 1/4 for wood and energy costs. It's that much. Things have gone crazy in Europe. And yet that market is expanding 30% year on year in Europe for wood fiber insulation. So when you do that, what you find is that not only do you have a viable business, but you have a product that you can bring to market that's renewable, recyclable, non-toxic, carbon sequestering, and cost competitive with all of the products that are out there, foam, fiberglass, and mineral wool on the insulation market. And I quite naively in 2017 quit my job at the University of Maine, thinking like, how hard can it be to raise $200 million? I told my wife, 6 months. We'll know in 6 months whether this is going to work. In 2021, there's more we can tell you, but I'm sure Tony will get in. In 2021, December 23rd, we closed a tax-exempt bond for $85 million, brought the balance of $130 million in private capital to the project, and now we're building out the UPM facility in Madison, Maine. One of the biggest breaks, though, that is relevant to this group here that we had was in 2019, we bought the UPM mill in Madison. Matt and I had been looking around. We realized we ended up purchasing a facility in Germany, decommissioning it, and the reason we thought we could do it is that we thought by reducing the capital expense, we could make it attractive enough for private investors. So we decommissioned that mill in Germany, moved it to Maine, and we started looking for closed, industrial space that we might take advantage of, and we found the Madison mill. We reckoned that probably a greenfield site would cost us about $60 million to build. We purchased the Madison mill for $1.9 million in 2019. That wasn't the biggest value, though. When I started looking at the mill, a guy called me up by the name of Marty Troy, Marty was the head of electrical instrumentation for over 30 years at Madison. Madison closed not for operational reasons, but market reasons. They made super calendar paper for inserts for the New York Times. Nobody buys, magazines anymore. And Marty said, "Hey, I hear you're interested in my building." And I said, "Yeah." And we went out to breakfast, and he was like, I pitched him, told him what we were doing, and he was like, "All right, I'll help you." And came out of retirement. The reality is we couldn't have even turned the lights on without Marty. We were able to, the paper machine was not out of the building. We saved about $20 million in electrical infrastructure. We have a 45 megawatt, 115 kV substation, all the motor control centers, power distribution you could possibly imagine. It's a 600,000 square foot mill, 4 60-ton bridge cranes. Steel and concrete was built for $300 million in the early 1980s, so relatively recent when it comes to mills. It's a beautiful site, 29 megawatts of hydro on site behind the meter. I could go on and on, but it was unbelievable how difficult it was to bring that capital to bear for the project, despite everything that I'm telling you, all the values we were able to create. It still took years and years off my life, and I'm not kidding about that. Only with the grace of our team, it really had nothing, again, architect, chemist, it had very little to do with us. It had to do with Marty, it had to do with Joe Clark, who was the head of mechanical maintenance for 25 years. Rick Vino, who was the head project manager at UPM for 25 years, joined our team and understood the process and converted what they knew about paper making to wood fiber insulation. And it was about, a chance meeting with Tony here, and he'll tell you about his background, but Matt and I were just completely naive about what we needed to do to bring the capital to bear. But a lot of people really believed in the project, in the product, and we were able to put the team together that could do it for us. And that's the best way to do work, is to have someone do it for you. So thanks, Tony.
That's actually a great segue to Tony. And I think the one thing I want to add is this all happened in the midst of a global pandemic. And there's so many stories, I think, that Josh and this panel could tell about what went right, what went wrong, what went really wrong, and then how they fixed it. But we're going to start with Tony to kind of give a bigger picture of the whole package and what was involved in putting it together.
Thanks, Janice. So I'll also try to do this without the mic if that works back there. So the time when Josh and Matt and I met was pushing 4 years ago now, 3.5 maybe. What they told me sort of hit all of my buttons, and it's interesting because each of these buttons are ones that hit some of our investors. Maybe they all didn't have all, but to me it was climate mitigation. I've been a volunteer for the Nature Conservancy internationally and locally for 30 years now. So it was climate mitigation, a big portion of which is sort of increasing the carbon sink that is the Maine woods or the whole northern forest. Green buildings. My wife and I tried to build a green building 20 years ago before there was such a thing as LEED certification. Actually got a lot of help from some experts in Vermont in doing that. The economy and employment in the Northwoods. Maine lost, Heather would probably know better than I, $2 or $3 billion worth of assets. $2 or $3 billion worth of assets that were the paper companies in Maine's Northwoods, and all the employment, of course, that went along with that. And the idea that sustainable forestry is a concept that you guys all get, the rest of the world continues to not understand it. And I think the wood products industry has a big marketing challenge to the rest of the world. We talked to investors who sort of assumed that we were going to clear cut the forest in order to make insulation and therefore didn't want to invest. So just remember that that's a view that's held out there, outside of the experts in this room. So it hit all my buttons, and I said, you know, I can help. You need somebody who's more current than I, and so I introduced them to a gentleman named Bill Ginn, who I knew from the Nature Conservancy, who started Nature Vest, which was a investor in natural solutions that the Conservancy started up. It's an incubator sort of a fund. He had retired, just retired, and Bill had done a lot of work, lives in Maine, and done a lot of work in the Maine woods. There were some problems here. Josh jokes about the architect and the scientist. In fact, that never was a serious problem. You know, some people would sort of laugh about it, Josh jokes about it, but there were much bigger issues. There's no intellectual property, right? So this is common technology. There's no edge. Investors out there, and I should say I became a small investor early on, oftentimes in moments of crisis. But there's no cash flow, as Janice mentioned. You know, it's most of institutional investing money doesn't want to invest in a business where there is no cash flow. It's all on the come. They like to put out a little money, get a little cash flow, then they go for round 2, and then they go for round 3, then they, you know, that's sort of classic institutional money. This is a manufacturing business. Think of where the big money out there has been made. It has not been in the manufacturing world. It's in the technology world. These guys are, and women are comfortable taking what I consider crazy, idiocy, flyers on technology, and unwilling to sort of think about the manufacturing business. They don't get it, they don't understand it. It was a huge hurdle, and time and again, between no cash flow and the fact that there's no technological edge, surfaced as we were trying to raise money. Part of the issue for us is, you know, we were trying to do something at scale that could really impact the northern forests. And so we could have, and in the early stages, we thought about, well, maybe we'll just do one of the lines, we'll do a small financing, so on and so forth. And it became pretty clear over time that if this was gonna work, we needed to be in with both feet and try to do the whole project. And then of course, as Janice said, we hit COVID. That's one of the reasons it took 3.5 years. But there were some others. I will tell you sort of a very funny story at the end. There was some great opportunity. There were these 2 guys who were magnetic. And for all Josh's modesty, the reason we were able to raise this money is that they were so incredibly effective, telling their story, engaging with their audiences, frankly, leaning on every relationship they had when we got to crises, and they were willing to, you know, mortgage their homes, put themselves completely on the line to make this happen. Huge, huge part of the reason this worked. Bill and I sort of understand the financial engineering parts, but if you don't have that, the financial engineering doesn't happen. There's some other great things. It's an incredibly high margin business. We're looking at gross profit margins in excess of 50%. So we were, people began, those who were willing to look at manufacturing began to look and say, oh, geez, you could actually make some money doing this. We had this edge that Josh talked about compared to the Europeans, and so there's a public company, Steico, in Germany, that any investor could look at and say, there's the business model. It's all publicly available. They could drag out the financials of Steico and plug in our materials costs and sort of get how the business would work. So we had some great advantages. So the way you $130 million is a lot of damn money, I'll tell you. The early stage, friends and family. Literally, you're scrambling to raise $25,000 so that you can. Nobody was getting paid, right? Everybody was on sort of this, well, somehow or other we'll get paid eventually here mode. We did have a little bit of payroll, so we had to, we had to meet payroll over and over and over. Remember, this took years. And then we had contracts. In order to advance the ball, we had to sign contracts. Then we would scramble to find those contracts. In the end, we raised about $12 million of that riskiest money. 13, about 12. That's a baker's dozen. The state was incredibly important to us, both in terms of that's funding at those critical early stages, and Heather will go into that, but also sort of lending the credibility of the state to this venture, saying, this could be really important to the state of Maine. Not a huge amount of money, but again, at the prime risk moment, right? The greatest risk is in those early years. Then we began to sort of put things in place. We realized that this is a solid waste recycling product. You may not think of it that way, but suddenly, if you do, you realize that either the wood chips coming out of the mills, that is a solid waste disposal problem. And the tops, maybe not the tops, but the 2-inch to 6-inch segments of the tree, the thinnings from the forest, that is a waste product under the tax law. And so we were able to get qualified to raise tax exempt money using the solid waste recovery provisions in the federal tax code, and use the Finance Authority of Maine as our vehicle to do that. So we realized we could raise, as it turns out, 85 million was the number we settled on, of tax exempt bonds, 30 years, 8%. That's going to look smarter and smarter and smarter over time, I can assure you. But to be able to fund a manufacturing business for 30 years is really incredibly important. We needed more equity, so having gone through the risk phase, we then needed sort of bigger bites at the apple. Instead of taking 25,000 here and 50,000 there, we needed $25 million, so we did a second round. Again, this was much less risky because those monies, which came from bigger institutions, people with an interest in Maine, and people with an interest in this industry, in the forest products world, the three biggest were $5 million a piece, and then we rounded out and ended up with $25 million. But much less risky because they didn't close unless the bonds closed. So they didn't, their money, they paid more or they got less of the company, if you will, for their money than the early risk takers. But they basically didn't take any risk that we wouldn't be able to raise the money. And then the last piece of the capital structure was essentially bank borrowings, which Deb is going to describe. Again, using the fact that we are in a depressed area meant that there are provisions in the tax code that allow you to do opportunity zone financing, to do what they call new markets tax credits, and it's a way to borrow money and get some free equity, if you will, by selling tax credits that are available. The other thing that sort of made this work is back in the friends and family stage, Josh and Matt began to build these relationships with the forest products industry. I had some, Bill had some, but our friends and family expanded to sort of two classes of people. All interested in Maine, but in one group, they're essentially environmentalists who were really interested in the climate story. And so we raised a bunch of money from those people who, some of them would say, you know, I could either donate it to a nonprofit or I can invest it in this. It's the same, to them it's the same dollars, and this looked like a great opportunity. That was great money for us, but more important was money from the forest products industry. So we raised a whole bunch of money early on from the named distributors in the state of Maine, Viking, Collins, Hancock. Those are names that many of you will know, from those families. And they were the first. That made sort of a huge impression on the rest of the world that this was an important product to the forest products world. And then we added and built on that as we built relationships with the industry, investors from loggers to right up to landowners, and we were having an interesting conversation earlier. No landowners, and that's a complicated subject, and it's really interesting that was the case. We couldn't persuade Maine, unlike Vermont. Maine has 4 or 5 very large private landowners, and two of the top 4 are individuals. And interestingly enough, we could never get them off a dime to invest in making their forests more profitable. And it's a long story and a complicated one, but it sort of shows how there's a lot of subtlety out there, and you guys would know this in the forest products world, who has different interests in what piece of this puzzle. The story I will tell you that's got really nothing to do with the substance here, but Josh mentioned December 23rd was the closing date on the bonds. I don't remember exactly what the date was, but it was like December 15th or something about that. We sent out a wire to an email to our investors saying, to this second round investors saying, you need to put up your $25 million now, so we have the money in escrow and we can close on the bonds. And one of them came back and said, we already sent you our wire. Turns out it went to Nigeria. And that investor said, sorry, don't have the money. So here we were, a week or 10 days from victory celebration, and we were short a bunch of money, $5 million call. And this is where sort of everybody, this whole team, sort of pulling together, using our relationships. We managed to raise another $5 million in the last 10 days before the closing. it was incredible. Nobody slept, and it was inspirational in sort of demonstrating the commitment that people had towards this opportunity. So we had industrial enterprises, private individuals, foundation, just all of a sudden out of the woodwork, and mostly Josh and Matt going and saying to people, we got a crisis, can you give us $1 million? And damned if it didn't work, and it's sort of a testament to the incredible power of this story. So I'm thrilled to have been involved and to stay involved, because we, for 4.5 years we were a fundraising company. That's all we did, 4.5 years. For 1.5 years, we're going to be a construction company, because basically we're building out this facility. And then we're going to turn into a real company. We're going to be a manufacturing operation starting the first quarter of next year. So that's a huge transition to make, and it's fascinating and really fun and really exciting, and I think we're going to change the world. So, Heather.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Tony. Heather.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I don't know how to follow changing the world, but I'll try. And I will say, Josh is really downplaying his role in this, although his Marty impression is amazing. And when you think about Marty and Joe and Rick Vino, I mean, those are men that worked at the mill, that lived and breathed that mill, and really, I think, helped along the way in the building part. But without Josh and Matt as well, really having the passion and the vision for the project. I mean, Marty fixed the electrical, right? Joe keeps things running. That's what they do. That's what they love to do, and they're super happy to be back doing it. But without Josh and Matt, and really this kind of passion. So just to take a step back, we were just talking about when they got in. 2019, I came in with the governor in 2019. I wasn't confirmed yet, and Jim Robbins, who you saw in the video, who everybody in Maine loves, probably most of you know and love him as well, called me and said, you gotta meet these guys. And I said, sure, of course. I hadn't really figured out where my desk was, but send them in. So in came Josh, I think just Josh that time, not Matt, and he was coming in to explain what the project was, and still in the transition from academic potentially to business owner at that point. So there was a whole lot about the chemistry and how it worked, and I nodded a lot, but then in the last 5 minutes got to where the choices were, how it could be done, and so then we really started talking about things that I was passionate about, right? Rural revitalization, rural jobs, tax base for some of these communities that really desperately needed a tax base, and strengthening our forest product supply chain. And so then you could see this really clear goal alignment for us, maybe for different reasons, but certainly really clear goal alignment there. And so we said, okay, well, this is a big project. It looks different, right? State government loves process, and they love steps, and they love to know what's going to happen. And you could tell from the start this wasn't going to be that, right? This was going to be big, and so we're all going to have to look at it differently. And so I said to Josh, can you come back in 2 weeks? And if you can bring these things with you, that would help. And what we did was convene a bunch of the social impact investors that we knew in Maine, the Finance Authority of Maine, Maine Technology Institute. None of these matter to you necessarily, but they were a diverse group of kind of lenders that each can take small pieces of the pie, right? And say none of us will make markets. We just don't drive the money for that. That's not what we should do. But to be able to find the points where we could be helpful to keep things moving was really critical. So we brought everybody in, and Josh and Matt came in and laid out the package. As we started talking about Madison, we included Madison town officials because they are amazing and willing to be very creative and supportive and take some risk on their side as well. And so Josh and Matt kind of did their thing, and then we asked them to step out and looked at the group in the room and said, okay, what are you gonna do? And they all hemmed and hawed and like looked at their shoes, and that wasn't the way they did it, right? They wanted somebody to file an application for something, and they wanted somebody to put up collateral for something, and this just wasn't that kind of project. And so it really took a lot of creative thinking on a much broader group, right? But Josh's passion, the clear alignment to a lot of key goals, and a little bit the state's unwillingness to say, we're not gonna do this, right? We were gonna do this, we were gonna support this project with everything we could, which certainly is never gonna be enough, but, right, we gotta do what we can. And so they all had to think differently. So they went back, and then we called them back in without Josh and Matt to say, okay, now put it on the table. And so they started making lists of things they could actually do. And then we started pushing and questioning, and there was a lot of, usually this is bad probably, but there's a lot of peer pressure around, wait a minute, your organization's gonna take this risk and figure out how to do this a little bit differently. Okay, well then maybe I need to think about this. And because none of them had to be out there on their own, it helped them all take a little bit more risk, think a little bit differently about what was there, and lean into the project. And so I think for anybody in the room looking at these projects, one is, just because it's big doesn't mean it's not doable, right? I mean, some of this vision and passion were part of what allowed all of us to kind of coalesce around it, and then bring in any resources that we had and any collaborators that we thought, right, give us the opportunity to introduce them to other people as well. So I think there was some real opportunity there, but for us being really clear about what challenges this was gonna solve and how it aligned to our goals, right? Climate goals, rural job goals, rural revitalization, all of that just it created the environment that we could then kind of lean in and do whatever we could do. And I think one of the important things, so you said, is fill in some of the gaps. And so one of the things from this that we're trying to learn in state government is to think about, where are those gaps, right? Because we're never gonna have enough money to be meaningful in the capital stack of big projects, but we have money to incubate these along the way in certain gap points. And I think that maybe is the role that there are a lot of roles state government can play, in my opinion, right? This collaboration, kind of leaning in and creating a lot of visibility, right? The governor really supports this project and loves this project and talks about it a lot in public, tries to, right? How many times have you had to get out the orange hard hats, Josh?
4 or 5 times.
Yeah, right? So, there's just this kind of natural support there that I think can be helpful as well. So there are a lot of things I think we can do. There are a lot of things that aren't comfortable, right, for people in state government or traditional economic development worlds. I think there's some folks from the Northern Border Regional Commission here too. And right, they were a great kind of partner to plug in one of the holes. We had lots of pieces of those. We used CDBG money and other things. So I would say sometimes in these, you have to close your eyes a little bit and just lean in. And that was one of the things, right, that we talked about as a collective group. Like, you don't have to do it by yourself, but we're all gonna do it. And otherwise, right, big deals aren't gonna get done in places like Maine because the funding is a little bit harder, right? It takes a little bit more to attract that funding, although the more of these we have, the less hard that will be. So for us, it was clear goal alignment, some real opportunity with Maine people, right, to invest in Maine people in rural Maine, which was a great spot for us, and a lot of confidence in what could come. So anyway, we're excited to keep working with you. I told Edith I love the sign out there that has like product dates, because that right makes everybody feel comfortable that there's more there. And we, I think, right, these types of big projects require work from all of us at all stages, and so we haven't kind of washed our hands and been done with it and said, all right, they're on their own now. It's okay, what else can we do? Where else can we be helpful? Right, as we keep doing this, operating capital is going to come up at some point, I'm sure of it, right? We're going to have to, we're good. All right, good.
Glad you're ready.
Yeah. Right, yeah. I just think there's more, right? And we want to kind of be supportive of these projects all the way through. So anyway.
Thank you so much, Heather. And Deb, bringing up the rear here.
New market tax credits, everybody's favorite topic. I'm not gonna get into how the sausage is made because it is based in the tax code and it's ridiculously complicated. But it's a good works well for various kinds of capital projects. So if you're buying a lot of new equipment, or you're building an addition, or you're starting a whole new plant, a whole new business that's capital intensive, or maybe you're buying a capital intensive business to, integrate into something that you're already doing. It can work well. There's a ton of lawyers and accountants that are involved. So in the case of GoLab, after you strip away all the costs that come along with it, they probably ended up with about $5 million, to throw into the pot, and it's really like equity.
It's better than equity because you don't have to give up any ownership for it.
Oh, exactly. Right.
It's free money.
Right, it really can be used by the owners kind of to satisfy their equity requirements for the other parties. So we've done about 100 of these financings since the program was started. The way it's set up is that organizations like mine, we're called a community development entity. Lots of nonprofit financial institutions, you may have heard of community development financial institutions, that's what we are. But also lots of different kinds of organizations have formed entities that can qualify to apply. So we apply once a year to the Treasury Department. It's competitive across the country. And then somebody like our organization gets an allocation of these credits, and then we find projects that fit, the intent of the program, which is in a distressed, economically distressed community. Often in rural areas, it's about, as Heather said, creating, good jobs in places where they've been lost, upward mobility, restoring the tax base. So in Maine, we couldn't have had a better project than GoLab, where it's hitting everything that the state has wanted. It's local control. It's replacing, the good jobs that were lost. There are other organizations besides ours in New England, and we work often with Evernorth, which they used to be Vermont Rural Ventures, Housing Vermont. They're based in Burlington, but they work all across northern New England. We've worked on a lot of projects together. In Vermont, an analogous project that we did years ago was the startup of Commonwealth Dairy, which is very analogous to GoLab, except it's in the dairy sector. And it was also very capital intensive startup business. Two really young entrepreneurs that had no money, and they were able to pull it together, and that at the time it was the biggest manufacturing plant that had been built in Vermont in 20 years. So this resource can be very powerful in new markets. Tax credits were a key part of that. And I guess I should explain quickly that the way it comes to you as cash. When people talk about tax credits, they think, well, wait a minute, does that mean I have to have income to set it off again? No, it comes to you as cash, this cash subordinate debt, and it's often banks, usually most generally banks will buy these tax credits, and they get a stream of them over 7 years. That cash that they put in up front to purchase the credits comes back to you, and that's the subordinate debt. And then they don't need any cash return because they're getting all of their return from this credit stream. And so that's what creates this kind of grant-like debt or grant-like equity, because the investor who's buying the credits, they don't need anything else. They just need compliance during the 7-year period, and once that 7-year period is over, they're gone, and the debt gets forgiven. An important thing to remember is the location. It does have to be, and that's a problem sometimes. It's surprising that, for example, in Maine, also in Vermont, there are places that you would think would absolutely qualify that don't. So the first thing you have to do is check the location. The other thing is that because of this too many lawyers, too much complexity. It doesn't work well for small like 5 million. So if your total project size, your total cost of whatever you're doing, 5 million and up is it's best. We've done things as low as 2 million. We did the renovation of the Millinocket Library in Maine. We did homeless shelter in Brattleboro, $2 million each. So it can be done, but a lot of organizations like ours don't want to do it. But we will look at anything that is a good project that really is needed in the community. It's going to create the kind of benefits that people are looking for. We'll look at it. And if you, I know, Janice, if you're going to have a list of contact information for people, like anybody is welcome to call me at any time. I'll put you in touch with the people you need to know to get something like this started or to evaluate whether it makes sense for your business. I'm happy to look it over, whatever you're doing. Can put you in touch with Evernorth, other people who have the credits, and figure out whether your location works and get you started.
Perfect, that's great. Yeah, well, I mean, for follow-up, for those who are interested in learning more, obviously GoLab has a table, so please visit them, and then we'll be here after this session if anybody wants to follow up. But right now, what I'd like to do, now that we've had all of this background, a wonderful video, is open it up to the audience for questions. And if you don't have any questions, I have a whole page here, so, and we've got 20 minutes. So, but I'm hoping that the audience is curious to learn more about this amazing project. So we're going to see first. Sure. The gentleman in the back.
Hi, I'm Paul Bowe from Madison. We've used fiberboard now for quite a while on our project from Styco. And one of the issues we're having is code approval. And I'm wondering what you guys are doing for that.
Did everybody hear him?
I think so. The question was from Bensonwood, which is a analogous sort of very well known by us in terms of like pushing the envelope for higher performance building. And Bensonwood uses wood fiberboard in their projects and code issues. Our project, all of our products will be UL certified. We anticipate, we've already done pre-testing thanks to the U.S. Forest Service, some grants. We've sort of pre-tested with European product and confirmed that for example, the bat and loose fill products, this was a big issue, obviously, for the financing. They wanted to know that we would be able to be UL certified. It will be UL certified, so the loose fill in the bat came in Class A for fire rating. What our chief marketing officer always talks about is, is it going to be eaten by bugs? Is it going to fall apart? Is it going to catch fire? And so we've been focusing on that. We have a number of very large grants with Oak Ridge National Labs, the University of Maine, Forest Products Laboratory at Wisconsin, but we've also, and the U.S. Forest Service gave us $250,000 to test that out. And so we're confident that actually all of our products will come in Class A fire rated, which means that they can be used in virtually any application, commercial or residential. We will be doing sort of testing of specific wall sections as well, so that to enable organizations like yours so that you don't have to do the work with code. We also think one of the really exciting things is that our marketing team, Matt is an architect and has dealt with a lot of these code changes. A lot of the people that we're hiring on the marketing team are architects, builders, people who know, the challenges that you're going to face and are looking ahead on that and looking at, how do we fit into the code? And we think it's a non-issue. But
Other questions? Go ahead.
So what's the raw material that you buy in? Is it clean chips or pulpwood logs?
So So the question was, what does our raw material look like? So this is I always forget to do this at any like logging or lumber event, and they're always like, the same question is like, how much are you going to use? What are you going to use? Can I sell you some? It's a softwood species agnostic product. So it can be any softwood. So in Maine, that mostly means hemlock, pine, spruce, and fir. It is a clean chip. We don't have we're not quite as finicky as paper mills are. There is a debarking chipping site as part of what we bought, but we decided that we were doing enough and we didn't want to run that as well. And we, as Tony mentioned, we had a lot of buy-in from the existing industry, and as many of you sadly know, we're in the neighborhood of where the Pixel Mill blew up, and where a lot of the residuals market has like just gone away. And so we were quite confident, and actually have guaranteed contracts with loggers and chip mills and sawwood mills for 8 years of our production. We'll consume about 300,000 green tons of softwood at full production. And yeah, that's our sort of mechanism of bringing that in.
Go ahead.
Since I first heard about the product, I've wondered, and you don't need to get into the details, obviously, of your process, but was just wondering, was the process a physical pulping process or a chemical pulping process?
Yeah, as Tony said, there's not really an IP secret here, so I'm happy to share with anyone, what we're doing. It's a TMP process. Effectively, what you're looking at here is a smaller, medium-density fiberboard mill. So we're taking in clean chips, we're steaming them, sort of a pre-steaming wash, and then it moves into a pressurized kettle. So there's no chemical process. The chips are just steamed like, for those of you who aren't into mill equipment, imagine an Instant Pot, pressure cooker on your kitchen table, but we're going at 8 bars of pressure. And then that spends about 10 seconds in there. That's really just to reduce the load on the refiner, because that's a big 5 megawatt motor that is taking those plates and grinding up those chips. And so the steaming is really just to reduce the sort of load on the motor. But it's really just a physical pulping process. Then those fibers come out of the refiner at 8 bars of pressure, 100% moisture content. We dry it down, and that becomes the feedstock for 3 different production processes, manufacturing processes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the fireproofing process?
Sure. In Europe, only in Europe, the board product actually has no fire protection in it, and still, in our testing, attains better resistance to fire than foam products. If you've ever just imagine, we strapped that on our buildings. If anyone saw the horrifying show that was the Grenfell Towers in London, that was foam board strapped to the outside of a building that caused that disaster. Our product is substantially, more fire resistant without any fire protection agent. We probably will, to get to Class A fire protection, add some either ammonium sulfate or boric acid. Those are typical fire protectant. Ammonium sulfate is a food grade fire protectant, and boric acid is what's used for cellulose insulation. So our advantage is that because we have a wet process for refining the fibers, we get to introduce that at the wet phase, and that reduces the amount of fire protectant that we have to use because it coats the entire fiber. So we use about half to a third of the fire protectant, which is great also because fire protectant, every non-wood thing we use is way more expensive than the wood chips that we use. So we're always trying and working with the University of Maine to try and find resins other products that we can use that are non-fossil fuel based to reduce our carbon footprint and frankly just reduce our cost. And as you all know, like the availability of products like that is just so hard to get, even if you have the money. So that's.
Can you stand up and speak loud? Thank you.
As you come online, do you expect that you'll be releasing EPDs and HPDs as a part of your product list?
Yeah, we're working with OneClick to have EPDs, and we will be open sourcing all of our energy we think a great advantage of our product, we're competing against foam, fiberglass, and mineral wool. Insulation is is the second worst next to cement in terms of carbon footprint in the built environment. We have nothing to lose. We're head and shoulders a better product. So, but manufacturers need to make that open source in order for people to believe it. So that is our plan. We issued a green. We couldn't get any certifications for bonds. The one thing we could get is a green bond certification, and so we did it. And what we've pledged to do is make all of our information about how we do our process, the energy usage, and where we're getting it from open source for anyone to look at, especially builders, architects.
What's an EPD?
EPD is an environmental product declaration. So it tells you all about the how the product is made, carbon footprint, all that kind of good stuff.
Yes, go ahead.
How many direct employees will the plant?
130. And lots of trucks. a lot of trucks. Effectively, we're de-densifying wood, so we get a lot more trucks going out than we have coming in. As I mentioned to some of you who came to the booth, we cube out before we weigh out. Our transportation is a huge issue with this. So tell all your friends to buy wood fiber insulation in Vermont because we don't want to have to send it to New York State. So that's why we're here. We're shilling for ourselves.
We're going to go here and then to Joe.
So it sounds like you have a marketing team in place. So I'm just curious what the groundwork is being laid to connect the dots to get this product in sticks and stuff here in Vermont and other places.
Yeah.
I want to see it there. So.
Yeah. I don't like to use this word too often, but our brilliant marketing manager, Edith Dollar, who is here. And if you saw the video and you've seen all of our graphics and stuff, that's all came from Edith. We didn't outsource any of that. We have support. But it's really been Edith and our Chief Marketing Officer, Scott Dion, who is, he lives right on the Canadian border. He was the Chief Operating Officer for SW Collins for many years until he quit during the midst of the pandemic to help us bring our marketing plan on board. He believes that much in forest products. His dad worked for 50 years at a veneer mill up in the county. And he's worked for SW Collins for 30 years or so and quit to join us, and he's an immense talent. He really helped to solidify our buy-in from the lumber industry. His knowledge and his years of selling their products around the state and worked for Brosco for many years, Brockway Smith, and he really helped solidify and tell our story to the lumber industry, and that brought on a lot of really great distributors. We will have two-step distribution that will get us all around the Northeast. We have a big national distributor that is interested and has committed to putting our product in all 5 distribution centers in New England and all 45 of their product distribution centers throughout the country. So we're really excited about that, but really our focus is on local distribution, independent lumber stores. We won't be in your Home Depots or Lowe's, but we will be in Arcade Miles, or there's some other Vermont. I don't want to leave anybody out, but all of your Vermont stores, you're on our list. Maybe you'll see me personally. So.
Go ahead, Joe.
Tony, you talked about the phase of the capital raise and that sort of evolution from friends and family to a different tier of investors, and it strikes me that that dynamic is not unusual. You know, an entrepreneur with a good idea, but sort of I think one of the barriers to accessing the capital out there is just frankly the sophistication of the entrepreneur to be able to talk to that level of investor. And I guess for all of you, but you know, Josh and Tony in particular, like, just do you have anything you kind of distill out of that experience of sort of learning, you know, to take a project like this and make that leap to be able to move beyond the sort of the passion argument, the good concept, and sell it to those investors?
I got your question. I don't think there is an answer to that. You know, it's a combination of everything from the state support, and there are all these little pieces that sort of come together to give you credibility. And that's really, you know, in the beginning, you got no credibility, and so you're out there with your tin cup. But over time, as you build these relationships, as you get, I think Viking Lumber was the first distributor who put money in the early friends and family phase. So Viking does, that makes you credible to Collins, let's say, and to Hancock. And so each of these pieces sort of build to suddenly you're at the point where you've got credibility, and the importance of the early funding is that is what you're using to build your team. So, you know, without that hard to come by early funding, you can't hire Scott. You can't hire Marty and Joe and Rick. And so the secret here is that sort of one step at a time, build your credibility, and then each one sort of reaches out to a new audience. We also got a fair amount of help in terms of introduction to people from our delegation. You know, who you know, Senators King and Collins, who know who know the state of Maine, and early on they were helpful, not so much in raising money, but in helping tell our story and introduce us to people. And each one of those conversations sort of builds on the one before.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the smartest things that we did, not realizing it was smart at the time, was that, you know, when we were working at the University of Maine, really early days, I asked someone at the University of Maine, like, who would you go and talk to in the forest products industry that might be interested in hearing our story? And they said Jim Robbins, and I thought it was because we lived in Belfast and they were in Searsmont, which is like 20 minutes away. I was like, okay, like that's I can get out a map, you know, I understand that. But when I started talking to Jim and his children, Alden, Catherine, Jim Jr., I understood that, you know, they were really a company of people who were about sort of rising tide lifts all boats, and they were really committed to the logging industry and supporting the logging industry, and very concerned about what was going on there, and saw early, you know, that this was something that could help. And that Jim, that person, you know, I would advocate for, like, people in this room, if you see something that you like, Jim took me around by the hand to, like, all the important people in the Maine forest products industry, and he was like, talk to this kid, he's smart. And I was like, I bumbled my way through most of my conversations, but I learned a lot of stuff, and you know, that, I think, the fact that we kept coming, we didn't get money from the forest products industry overnight. You know, as you can well imagine, you know, a lot of them wanted to see us mortgage our house before they wanted to put their own money in, and that's fair. You know, that, I think that's not unfair to ask for, you know, they wanted to see how committed we were actually to doing this. But the fact that we kept coming back and kept coming back, you and I have talked about it, persistence has been, something that we've needed, and it, I think this industry, as you well can, I think everyone would acknowledge, really respects hard work, and I think we gained that credibility over time, that we respected the industry and that we were willing to do the work to make it happen.
That comment makes me think, one of the other interesting things that we've observed now, sort of looking back, is we had some really hard blows, some things that really hurt, and but interestingly enough, you look back on them now, and a lot of those moved us to a better place. It was a horrible hurdle to get over at the moment, but once we did, we said, actually this is a better place to be than where we were before. So some of that is that sort of resilience. You get knocked down, you learn your lesson, you figure out a way around the problem, and people begin to respect that and understand it.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, as a Vermont investor, this is our first investment outside of Vermont, and probably the riskiest investment we've ever done, I'll be honest with you.
Best investment you ever made.
Yeah, but that's why we're in business, to provide risk capital and patient risk capital. But I think what sold me and our board was both the courageousness of the entrepreneurs to do this, and the number of partners they had already at the table who've already put money in, who I knew were gonna be there. Nobody's gonna let this fail, right? There are so many partners who have skin in the game that nobody's gonna let this opportunity fail. And for all of the other reasons, from a mission perspective, utilizing the waste product, supporting the northern forest, bringing good jobs into a rural community, and beyond the good jobs, you haven't even heard about some of the things they're doing as an employer to attract and retain good employees, like supporting a child care facility, providing transportation to their workforce, paying a living wage. All of these things just resonate, and I think it's a good example of what we can do when we put our minds together and when we work together to support a very critical component of the northern forest infrastructure. So that's why we wanted to bring this to the table, and I think we are 1 minute over. So with that, I will say thank you all for the opportunity to tell Go Lab's story, and please do feel free to connect with everybody on the panel after this session.
Thank you.